Sean Fraser is the federal housing minister. Hi, Minister Fraser. Good to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate making the time to come into the studio. Back in August, the Prime Minister said, Minister, housing isn't a primary federal responsibility. Would you say today the opposite is true?
Well, look, I'd invite viewers to watch the second half of that sentence where he said the federal government can and must play a role. The reality is that at different levels of government have different responsibilities. From a technical point of view, if you look at the Constitution, you'll find matters of local concern tend to fall to provinces and municipalities. But we've demonstrated over the past number of months, if you use federal leadership and federal funding, you can have a meaningful impact when it comes to building more homes in this country, and that's exactly what we're setting out to do.
I think that our audience, and certainly myself, understand the technicalities of jurisdictional issues. My question was more getting at the sentiment around it. Yes, he did conclude by saying it is something that we can and must help with, but he started off by saying it's not a primary federal responsibility. It's not something we have direct carriage of. My sense is the work that you've been tasked with is to prove the opposite is now true.
Certainly. Look, there's an all-hands-on-deck approach within the federal government, but thankfully I'm seeing a shift in attitudes and approaches across levels of government.
Do you think if that recognition had been made earlier, that your government does have the number of federal levers available to itself, and certainly I'm not taking away from the role that other jurisdictions have to play here, but if your government had recognized earlier that you had more to do in this space, the crisis would not be as pronounced as it is today?
Look, it's difficult to look back and understand exactly what the impact of a policy decision taken at an earlier point in time would have resulted in. But let's not pretend that we only started advancing housing policy in September of this past year. Since 2017, we've gotten back into the business of home building with the National Housing Strategy. The difference, what you see over the past few months compared to the past few years, is the focus was more narrowly directed at affordable housing for low-income families. We're now shifting our focus to not only continue investing in affordable housing, but to increasing supply dramatically in the market to restore affordability for everyone. Certainly, if we had adopted certain policy decisions a little bit sooner, perhaps there would have been a greater impact, but it's always a good time to do the right thing, and my sense is going forward, you're going to see a meaningful impact as a result of the policies we've adopted.
And I do have questions about those policies going forward, but we're looking back kind of on the year that was, and I think that it's my job to sort of respectfully challenge you on what you just put forward, and I want to quantify it in this way. Back in 2015, the average price of a home in Canada was about $413,000. That's according to the PBO. By the end of 2021, the average house price nationally was about $811,000, a 97% increase. The PBO crunched the numbers and found that in the years that followed 2015 and prior to the pandemic, house prices delinked from household borrowing capacity in several CMAs, from Toronto to Ottawa, Victoria to Vancouver. House prices in those markets were 20% or higher than affordable prices based on household borrowing capacity. The housing strategy you put forward in 2017 pitched the creation of 160,000 new units. Do you admit now, do you concede that you did not meet the moment as it existed?
One of the things that I think is important to understand is you shouldn't just be looking at the comparator in terms of pricing between 2015 and today. Since the early 2000s, Canada has been on a steady upward track at roughly the same proportion until very recently. I would argue that the recent changes that you've seen, particularly when it comes to the rate of interest and the limited number of spaces available in the market, have put supply and demand in a position where you've created, both from a supply and demand point of view and a cost of borrowing point of view, prices out of reach for a lot of families. But let's not pretend that this trend only began in 2015. We've got a 20-year history of prices steadily going upward in Canada. So certainly we could.
But your own platform and your own policy proposition in 2017 recognized that there was a crisis brewing. You used the word crisis back in 2019 in your platform, but the solutions you put forward did not seem to address it as such. And I ask you against the backdrop of, can Canadians be sure this time around you are correctly assessing the situation as it is?
Well, my point of view from this point in time is that we need to do everything that we can. Certainly, I think with the benefit of hindsight, it would be great if all levels of government could have done more. Of course, with the focus being more on social housing.
I can ask those governments. I'm asking about your government.
Yeah, certainly. And I think right now, let's not just talk about the hypothetical. Let's actually look at the policy measures that we are putting in place. We've now removed the GST from new apartment construction, which we expect to build between 200,000 and 300,000 more homes over the next decade. We've put forward the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is fundamentally changing the way that cities permit permit and approve and zone for more housing by increasing density and speeding up the process. We've already got deals that are worth about 250,000 homes, a little bit more actually, just with the cities we've signed deals with. We recapitalized the Canada Mortgage Bond Program, which is responsible for financing about 30,000 homes a year. Extrapolated over 10 years, the math becomes quite easy. There's a series of other policies that we put in place just in the past few months that is getting us to a place where we're now going to have nearly 1 million additional homes compared to what we were on track for just in September.
How much more aggressive are you prepared to be in that space? And let's focus on the demand side of things, or sorry, the supply side of things right now. The numbers I had were about 200 from your office were 266,646 units over 10 years, about 48,000 over 3 to 4 years. You're putting the number 1 million on the table. The number that the CMHC has put on the table is 3.5 million new units above and beyond what was already planned as of about this summer this year that need to be created by 2030 in order to restore affordability. Even 1 million at the top end of what you're saying is less than a third of what is required. Are you prepared to be as aggressive as 3.5 million homes required? Is it even possible?
So first, let me just address the discrepancy in the math that you pointed out. So the 266,000 odd number that you raised is just through the Housing Accelerator Fund, and those numbers don't come from the federal government. That's the projection of the cities with whom we've signed agreements, and in the case of Quebec, the province in which we signed an agreement. The total of 1 million is the sum total of the different policies. So we're not where we need to be yet. I'll be the first to acknowledge that, and we need to do more. One of the things that we've got to understand is the federal government can do what it is within its control. My goal is to do everything I can to make it possible to achieve that 3.5 million. Many people don't think it is possible because we would have to significantly increase the pace of building. But if we do everything we can to make the math work for builders, to invest in social housing, to change the way that cities build homes, and importantly, grow the productive capacity of the Canadian workforce by investing in innovation and skills development, I believe we can make it possible, but we are going to need to see other levels of government and home builders come on board with a new level of ambition as well.
There are things in your jurisdiction on the demand side of things, and we discussed it this week as well. And in particular, I wanted to point to the number of temporary residents here, either working or in a student capacity. Between July 1st, 2022 and July 1st, 2023, 700,000 temporary residents came to Canada. Your government toyed with the idea of capping, for example, international students, but has now backed away with that, implementing different measures instead. Why aren't you entertaining more seriously a cap at this point? Because supply, no matter how aggressive you are, is going to take time to build up.
So there's a number of different elements, and first of all, let me say thank you for recognizing the nuance between our permanent residency programs and our temporary residency programs. For the benefit of those watching, the federal government sets a level that we target each year for our permanent residency. Our temporary programs are driven by demand. The reforms that Minister Miller announced just a few days ago, I believe are going to have a meaningful impact when it comes to the international student program. There are colleges in this country that are providing fake educations and exploiting international students that need to be dealt with. But the government of jurisdiction to determine who has access to that program is the provincial government. So by changing the financial criteria to enter, by adjusting the working hours that students can actually participate in, and by adopting a series of other measures to partner with trusted institutions who can provide housing to the students who come and pay exorbitant tuition fees to participate and gain a Canadian education, we can actually make sure that the supply grows to accommodate larger numbers, and to the extent that it has a downward pressure on the number that comes in because the institutions are not supporting them, that's okay. But we need to continue to do what we can on the supply side and focus what's within our jurisdiction on the demand side as well.
I do understand if the runway were a very long one and the crisis wasn't as acute as it is right now, giving those measures the benefit of the doubt. But the fact is 700,000 new temporary residents is not a small number. I recognize that the labor force needs those people. I recognize that the universities and provinces will fight back against a cap. But you do have a cap within your levers, within the federal government's jurisdiction, even if it were temporary, in order to help abate the crisis while the supply side of things works itself out. Why won't you entertain that?
Well, it would be a dramatic change in the way that we actually run our immigration system.
Doesn't the crisis necessitate dramatic action?
Well, it does necessitate dramatic action, but there's different ways you can take on that very specific challenge. My belief is that by actually putting the responsibility onto institutions who benefit from the temporary programs, we can actually limit the appetite of people who might might be seeking to bring individuals to Canada for their own personal financial gain, but instead provide them with a quality education and with the housing that's necessary. But let's not forget to take a look at the other side of the ledger. The international student program is also an incredible boon to Canada, not just in the tens of billions of dollars to our GDP, but the pipeline of young and talented people who come and make contributions. So we don't want to damage the reputation of the program.
But I'm not saying eliminate it, I'm saying cap it while the housing crisis is acute as it is now.
Yeah, and look, there's different proposed approaches to this, but I think we owe it to the program and to the well-being of the country to try to work with institutions who are willing to provide the supports that are necessary first. Should that not work, we can always consider more action should it be necessary, but when I actually engage with experts who study the different policy options, few of them are saying that a hard and fast cap as step one is the appropriate response. Giving an opportunity for provinces and institutions to engage with the program in a way that provides for the students who come here will both allow us to grow the absorptive capacity of communities and allow us simultaneously to benefit from the enormous talents that young people who become educated in Canada and want to work in Canada have to offer the communities that they move to.
Okay, Minister, I'm out of time. I'll leave it there. Thank you for your time. I
A
appreciate
pleasure,
it.
as
Happy
always.
holidays.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.